and the man I'm about to introduce, Frank Mckenna. Those of us in this region know Mr. Mckenna not only by what he currently does, but by the legacy that he left in New Brunswick and how he transformed the economy of New Brunswick, but equally and more importantly, transformed the spirit of New Brunswickers when it came to looking beyond the boundary, the electoral boundaries of New Brunswick, and looking out inside of the Federation into Canada. Mr. Mckenna has continued to be a strong voice, not just for New Brunswick, but for Atlantic Canada. He doesn't mind calling you when he thinks you're wrong, and he doesn't mind calling you when he thinks you're right. And I appreciate both calls, sir. But Mr. Mckenna is a proud Saint of Exeter. He's proud of the relationship that he has with this university, and I'm proud to call him a friend, and I want to welcome him to the podium.
Well, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Premier. I'm a big admirer of your leadership, as you know, and deeply appreciative of your ongoing support for this institution. I appreciate it enormously. And you reminded me today when I walked in and saw Mulrooney's office, I almost was looking for a cap because I've never gone there without being cap in hand. I felt bare without it. So thank you very much, and boy, you've come a long way. I tell you, that's a hell of a speech. I also want to pause here to single out Carolyn Mulrooney. She was my partner in crime in raising funds for this project. Total joy to work with. Impressive leadership skills. It's pretty clear that the apple hasn't fallen far from the tree. And I'm with Premier McNeil. I'd get behind her, too. Very impressive. I also want to acknowledge the critical roles of Sean Riley and Kent MacDonald, who are both here. Leadership matters, and we've been well blessed. I affectionately call our presidents the Lord of the Rings. And we've had some superb presidents and Lord of the Rings. Now, I've been given 4 minutes, which isn't easy. You shouldn't have done so much. Hard to describe it in 4 minutes, Brian. But let there be no mistake. This magnificent project is here today because of the massive reservoir of respect for Brian Mulroney across the country and around the world. There's no doubt in my mind that in the full sweep of history, he'll be remembered in the pantheon of our greatest prime ministers. And I'm in a position to know I had a ringside seat. Prime Minister Mulroney led a government of big ideas. Whatever your political perspective, you could not help but admire the audacity of Mulroney's agenda. Well, let's just look at a few of them. Mentioned before, free trade. We take it for granted now as a country because there's a consensus view in Canada. All the political parties are lined up. But back when we were fighting for free trade, led by Prime Minister Mulroney, it was 50-50. It was a hard-fought battle, very tough. When I called Prime Minister Mulroney to tell him I was going to support him on free trade, which was a bit of a break with my party, I remember him saying, Frank, I appreciate it. I'm sure this is a matter of principle. I said, it is. And he said, can you tell me how you arrived at this position? I said, I read the free trade agreement. I read the document. And he said, anything I can do for you? And I said, yeah, just don't embarrass me with it, okay? 2 hours later, my communications assistant comes running and he said, you got to see this. Prime Minister Mulroney's up in the House and he's in full flight. And John Turner's attacking him on the free trade agreement. He said, I don't know why you're against it, Turner. He said, Mckenna's for it. He said he read the agreement. Why don't you? So I said, thank you for not embarrassing me with that. The introduction of the GST. Now, we think of that, we just assume that accomplishment today, but this was an enormous, controversial introduction of a consumption tax into our tax regime, one that every country in the world desperately wants to achieve because it's effective and fair. The United States would love to have what we have today, but it was a near-run thing. Very controversial, but today it's responsible for the very healthy fiscal situation that our countries face. The Acid Rain Treaty, which helped to preserve the ozone layer, resulted in him being named Canada's greenest Prime Minister. The battle against apartheid, which you so correctly pointed out, a very, very high point in Canada's international diplomacy. Courageous effort to find constitutional reconciliation. Any of these challenges would be daunting. Mulroney tackled them all. Now, I've always been deeply moved by Theodore Roosevelt's tribute to the man in the arena, and it could have been written about Brian Mulroney. It's not the critic who counts, nor the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, but who does exactly strive to do the deeds, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat. I think you'll all agree, Mulroney will never be known as one of those cold and timid souls who never knew victory nor defeat. If his agenda for Canada was audacious, his agenda for Atlantic Canada was breathtaking. For us, Brian Mulroney was our greatest Prime Minister, bar none, our greatest Prime Minister. Right from the beginning, we knew we had a special friend. He established ACOA, which was a magnificent achievement dedicated to the advocacy and support for Atlantic Canada growth. He did something else. He anchored it in Atlantic Canada. He actually set up a federal government department in Atlantic Canada. Now, we think that that's a big deal. We've got a Department of Fisheries in Ottawa that's 3,000 miles away from the nearest fish. We got a Department of Agriculture 2,000 miles from the nearest cow. And so we actually took a department from Ottawa and put it right down in Moncton, New Brunswick. That was an achievement, Prime Minister. He funded the 4-lane highway system, saving more lives than we could ever count. He delivered frigates to the shipyard in St. John, New Brunswick, which is created is the base for the massive naval construction program, biggest procurement program in Canadian history taking place in Halifax today. And I still remember the day he called. Premier, I just wanted to let you know that we're doing the frigates in St. John. I mean, this is a big friggin' deal. We're talking about billions and billions, thousands of jobs, and just a nonchalant call, I just want to let you know we're doing the frigates in St. John, New Brunswick. And this was after a massive campaign to get him to split the frigates between Quebec and New Brunswick. And I said, thank you, Prime Minister, but my breath is taken away. I thought you were under huge pressure to put them in Quebec. Why did you put them in St. John? He said, because it was the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. And I thought that was pretty magnificent. He modernized pulp mills across the region, responsible for the construction of the Confederation Bridge. You think that's a big deal? Try building anything in this country today. That bridge spanned waters between two provinces and was a federal jurisdiction, and the three levels of government all got together under great leadership and got the job done. You couldn't get that done in 20 years today. So it was a magnificent achievement, and the people of Prince Edward Island and New Brunswick, thank you for it. Now, I also want to say a special word for the Acadians of the province of New Brunswick. We have a special affection for Prime Minister Mulroney. Il a enchâssé la loi 88 dans la Constitution de Canada. He entrenched Bill 88 in the Constitution of Canada. A tough thing to do. It entrenched the equality of French and English in New Brunswick, and it created the basis for what I think is one of the most harmonious relationships in the world, where both communities live in confidence and respect for each other. Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier Ministre. We've not had a Prime Minister before or since with such a deep affection for a region and willing to put their money where their mouth is. And there's one final accomplishment that I want to emphasize. It's remarkable only because it shouldn't be remarkable. It's called civility. We live today in a world of polarization, ugly discourse, public policy being hijacked by small people with big megaphones, toxic brew of character assassination, accusations from the anonymity of social media platforms. Watching the evening news is enough to make you want to stock up on canned goods and head for a cabin in the woods. But that wasn't the way Brian Mulroney operated. We learned to roll up our sleeves and work together for the betterment of our country, our Canada. Those of us who were provincial premiers actually came to believe that the national interest trumped our provincial interest. We learned to disagree without being disagreeable. It was a golden moment in Canadian politics where intense debates were fought by partisan political leaders with respect and, I dare say, warmth. We were each other's best friends. It was an age of civility, and I feel will not see its equal. I want to end on a personal note. Brian Mulroney was born and raised in Baie-Comeau, Quebec. I was right off the farm from Appahock, New Brunswick. We came here on different highways, Prime Minister, but we both arrived at St. Avex with the asset of our pants. We had one constant. We both fell in love. We fell in love with an institution that embraced us, that nourished us, inspired us, and made us who we are today. And although we're from different political faiths, we've had a lifelong friendship. Any differences we might have had was less powerful than the ring we shared. Prime Minister Mulroney, this magnificent institute that we're in today could have been placed anywhere in this country. You chose to put it here. We're deeply grateful. We will never forget. Thank you.